Hey, happy Monday morning to you, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are looking at the resurrection as taught by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 in a thematic study of that chapter. We're not doing a verse by verse because that would be even longer than what it's currently turning into, all right? But we're looking at Paul's statement that the resurrection, which will be the harvest, would be at the end. The great question, of course, is what end did Paul have in mind? Now, all futurists say, it's at the end of the current Christian age. It's at the end of time. But I've shared with you the correlations between Paul's reference to the harvest, Jesus, the first fruit, the harvest, and Matthew chapter 13. Very simply stated, the resurrection harvest of 1 Corinthians 15 would be the resurrection harvest of Matthew chapter 13. The resurrection harvest of Matthew chapter 13 would be when Daniel chapter 12 verse 3 was fulfilled. But Daniel chapter 12 verse 3 would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. Incidentally, over the last several days, I've been involved in a Facebook discussion with a former preterist who claims that Daniel chapter 12 verses 2 through 5 talks about the end of time. Daniel chapter 1 talks about Antiochus Epiphanes, and verse 6 and 7 talks about something unrelated to verses 2 through 5. I have challenged this individual over and over and over and over again to give me one syllable of exegetical, textual, and contextual justification for that claim, and he has not so much as said one word, not one single keystroke. It's because he knows that you cannot insert a huge chronological gap between Daniel 12:1 and Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 and following. You just can't do it. Well, the image here is one of harvest. What I want to share with you now is the correlation between Matthew 13, 1 Corinthians 15, Revelation 14. Notice in Matthew chapter 13, we have the coming of the Son of Man with the angels for the time of the harvest after the proclamation of the gospel. You know, the seed is the word of God that is sown into all the world, Matthew chapter 13. And then you have the coming of the Son of Man at the time of the harvest at the end of the age. Well, what do we have in 1 Corinthians 15? You have the coming of Christ at the time of the harvest at the time of the end. Now watch this. And by the way, you have Christ as the first fruits. Those are the Christ at his coming, then comes the end. This is harvest imagery. And Christ is the first fruit. Now, again, watch this very carefully. Revelation 14, 1 and 2. John sees 144,000. Who are the 144,000? They are the first fruit out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now wait a minute. Here we have a direct identification of the first fruit of the harvest. Who is Christ? First fruit. He and the first fruit of Revelation 14 are an organic unity. And it identifies the framework and the context of the resurrection harvest. Christ is the first fruit of Judah, out of Judah, and the 144,000 are the first fruit of those redeemed to God from men, but they are the 12 tribes of Israel. Pardon me. Now notice, Revelation 14, 6 and following. I saw a great angel flying through the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to proclaim to every nation, kindred, tongue, and tribe. What was he saying? The hour of the judgment of Babylon has come. Oh, but wait. What do we find? At this hour of the judgment of Babylon. Revelation 14:13 and following, we have the judgment of the vine. This is so critical. Do you realize that in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, Israel is invariably, when divine imagery is used, Israel is the vine. Jeremiah chapter 2, 17 and following. God said, I brought you out of Egypt, I planted you as a holy right vine. How then have you become a corrupted vine unto me? Isaiah chapter 5, Israel is my vine. Here in the book of Revelation, which draws on the Old Testament perhaps more than any other New Testament book, we have the imagery of the harvest of the vine because the time of the harvest had come. The fruit was full, which means the measure of sin, the measure of suffering had been filled up. Folks, there is perfect correspondence here. When does the time of the harvest come? When the fruit is ripe. When does the resurrection therefore take place? When the harvest is ripe. When does the harvest take place? Revelation 14. When the vine had filled up the measure of her sin by persecuting the saints. Who was that? Well, Jesus said it was Old Covenant Israel. Matthew 23, 29 and following. We thus have absolute, perfect correspondence between Matthew chapter 13. The harvest would be in fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12, which would be when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. 1 Corinthians 15, the harvest would be at the coming of the Lord at the time of the end. Revelation 14, the harvest of which the 144,000 were the first fruit, Christ being the first fruit of that first fruit. And it would be at the time of the fullness of the vine, when she had filled up the measure of her sin by persecuting the saints. She was full of blood. She is the vine. And that was Israel. And thus, the time of the harvest would be at the time of the judgment on the vine. But the vine was Old Covenant Israel. Therefore, the harvest, i.e. the resurrection at the time of the end, the time of the harvest of 1 Corinthians 15, would be at the time of the judgment of Old Covenant Israel. Boy, this is powerful stuff. And I've got more and more and more on this in my book, Who Is This Babylon? Go to my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. Order the book. Send me a note saying that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Well, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings, and we've got more on the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 on the flip side. We'll see you there.